Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 165, and we're going to talk about free speech because of what's going on in England. And we're going to go over a little bit of a deconstruction, an easy deconstruction method. Remember, these episodes are being uploaded on Rumble, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other places. If you have any feedback, or if you have any questions, or you have a topic request, free to do some research for that. Just email me at subjectiveprofessor@gmail.com. All right, so free speech, something that we're pretty familiar with here in the United States, uh, thankfully. The First Amendment goes like this: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So, pretty simply, this is the First Amendment of the Constitution. Congress can't make any law to make any particular religion a state religion, the religion of the country, nor can it prohibit a religious practice. And then, of course, going along with that, hand in hand, being able to say what you believe is the freedom of speech, right? So the idea of being able to speak freely does come a lot, or has a very intimate relationship with what one believes. You say what you believe. And as the way that I define religion is just simply a system of belief. Science can be religion, atheism can be religion, so anything can be religion. And so, what you believe to be true, you should be able to be free to do so. And if other people ask you about it, you should be able to answer them. Now, keep in mind that it can be a belief about anything: a political belief, an economic belief, a financial belief, a belief of what would be a great entrepreneurial idea. All of these things are part of freedom of speech. Also, then, it stands to reason then that there should be a freedom of the press. So you can print anything that you want, say anything that you want, and peaceably assemble. This goes to freedom of association. You can associate or gather with anyone else that you want. Who cares? It shouldn't be anyone else's business. And if we feel that we are wronged, then we should be able to petition the government or go after the government, however you want to say it. So, freedom of speech, very much important. Not only is it important for us to be able to express ourselves freely, right? Whatever we think is true, or whatever we disagree with, we can voice that disagreement. And so we should be able to do so, to speak freely in private and in public spaces. So at home and online, right? And so online platforms, social media, has been extremely liberating, at the same time destabilizing when it comes to getting an audience. You don't have to just stay local by going on your soapbox on a street corner in your neighborhood. You could just put your soapbox, like I am, on Rumble, and whoever is passing by and feels like they want to listen to it, then they can listen to it, all three of you. But anyway, so the online social media platform is just an extension of our everyday life. Keep in mind, being able to speak freely in private is violated in a totalitarian society. We talked about this recently when it came to East Germany before the fall of the Soviet Union. One in every four people was a government informant. So you couldn't even go home and have some sort of privacy there. There was no privacy. There was no guarantee of privacy, and there was no promise of it either. So saying things at home, we should be able to do that. So the freedom of speech also means that you have to allow criticism or analysis, especially when you are disagreeing with someone else. You should be allowed to explain why you disagree with someone else's subjectivity, particularly when it comes to the relationship between citizens and their government. So the Constitution, Article 3, Section 3, when we talk about treason against the United States, which is kind of controversial, right? But it's a topic that I think that's pretty relevant right now. Treason against the United States, uh, I'll quote it. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of two witnesses to the same overt act or on confession in open court. Period. All right. So in the Constitution, there are articles, and one of the articles, Section 3, Article 3, talks about treason, right? Talking against the government. Well, it's kind of interesting because if you look at it closely, when the US itself, the United States government, engages in bad policy, whether it's war, immigration, or even in giving assistance to entities which are at war with the United States, then this is treason. And so the United States is, the government is guilty of this, right? And we've talked about this before, how Thomas Massie discussed the situation in Afghanistan, where it was very easy for the Taliban to blow up a lot of the building projects that were going on over there, particularly this one dam. And so the US government made an agreement with the Taliban. Don't blow it up, and we'll give you 30% of the electricity that is generated by the dam. So that's basically giving assistance to the enemies of the state. That would count as treason, right? And so you get into this problem where it's hypocrisy. So they are allowed to do it, but you're not allowed to do it, right? And so if we're not allowed to do it, they shouldn't be allowed to do it. Or if they can do it, we should do it too. But then if everyone is allowed to do it, then what's treason, right? And so you get into that kind of ridiculousness, which is why more and more people have less and less respect for the laws of the land or even for the government, right? And so this idea of treason also is kind of interesting, right? Because the government gets to decide and define what is treason, right? So January 6th, people were protesting, all of a sudden it becomes treason. And I think I don't have to explain to you that the whole January 6th thing, the day that it happened and I saw all of it happen and people started calling it an insurrection, I was like, if this is an insurrection, then this is the worst insurrection in the history of the planet, right? There were no weapons, there was no violence, right? The only violence that was perpetrated was on the part of the Capitol Police, when they shot Ashley Babbitt, right, and killed her. And any other fatality that was a result that came as a part of that was after the fact, right? It had nothing to do with the actual protest that day. And they are going after the people who were there at the Capitol with extreme prejudice. And they did it very quickly, which is in contrast to the, what do you call it, dragging of feet over the Trump assassination, right? So the government can define what is treason, what is hate speech, what needs to be disallowed, what is bad information, what is misinformation, and then they ban it, right? So it's on this idea that certain language, certain things are dangerous, that they are now going to say that not all speech is protected. In other words, the foundation of this country, which is freedom of speech, is no longer there, right? And so you can get in a lot of trouble for saying the wrong thing. It's funny because even in the university, the understanding is that because it's an academic climate, you can say kind of far out things and you don't get in trouble because it's for the sake of education. Like if you can explain how what you said was educational, was contributing to the education of your students, then it was justifiable, right? But now you can't even say certain things. You can't challenge certain things. You can't question certain things. And so clearly, free speech no longer exists. And I always said that, in my episode where I talked about how all comedy is humor, is racist, excuse me, all speech is hate speech to someone, somewhere, at some time. All speech always offends someone. And if you look at it that way, then either you ban all speech or you allow all of it to happen. Now, you contrast this mentality that we have here in the United States for people who grew up in the United States a couple of decades ago, perhaps. Maybe it's less so among the people, young people today, because they're the ones that are screaming about hate speech. But contrast that with the attitudes in England, right? Prince Harry, I remember a few years ago, he came to the United States and someone asked him about the free speech phenomena here in the United States. And he thought it was really strange. Like he couldn't get his head around it. Like, how is it possible that people can say whatever it is that they want? That's just weird. And I thought that was odd for him to say. But then I thought, well, he's a nobility. And of course, people aren't allowed to speak their mind in front of him. They have to ask permission first, right? And then he has to ask permission of other people when he's speaking with people who are higher than him on the nobility ladder. And so what you have then in England is not free speech, but rather the criminalization of speech. It's not even speech anymore. You can just, quote someone, retweet something, or repost something on social media, and now you're in trouble for it, right? So that's a very kind of odd thing where the government is just so weak in its position that it has to censor anything that opposes or undermines the authority of whatever it is that they're doing. It's insane, really. I bet that if this was 200 years ago, people in England would not have stood for it, right? They would not have tolerated this, and there would have been a lot more trouble than there is now. So in a lot of other places, I think certainly not just England, but in a lot of places of the world, to say what you actually think, what you actually believe, is very risky. I thought England was much more progressive, had was much more tolerant of different opinions, but apparently not, or at least that's kind of what it has become. And the United States is just, as some people would say, 4 or 5 years behind England. That would be kind of insane if we started seeing that widespread. I mean, it's happening now, here and there, but it's not as widespread as it seems to be over in England. Now, in the United States, you're taught to speak freely from a very young age. And, being in a traditional Asian family, this gets you in trouble a lot. So when I went to school, I was always taught to ask why, right? Because that's the, foundation of learning. You got to ask why. And so when I would come home and my dad would say something to me, and I would say, why? But in Asian society, that's talking back. And I think in some Western cultures that also is a little bit impolite if you're just always saying it because you don't feel like doing it, and so you're either procrastinating, putting it off, or just trying to find a way out of doing what was requested of you. But a lot of times for me, because I was a curious kind of guy, I would just ask why. Why are we doing this? Why do we have to do this? What's this for? What's the goal? What's the point? So I got into a lot of trouble because to do that is not really my parents were very traditional. You were just, the only thing you were supposed to say was yes. When do you want it? Yes, and for how long do I do it? Whatever. Now, pulling back a little bit, being able to ask why is inconvenient for authoritarians, people who just want to order other people around, bossy people, right? Because when you ask why, you're asking for a reason. What's the reason for that? And then when they give you an answer, you're like, oh, so why is that? And if you just keep asking why, chances are you're going to get to a point where there's no answer, right? And so when there's no answer, and it's a significant juncture of this questioning process, then either it delegitimizes or the authority of the person who's throwing their weight around, or it inspires you to figure it out yourself. So this process of asking why is a form of deconstruction, right? So when someone tells you to do something and you say, why do I have to do this? Because I said so, right? Because I said so basically is a power move. You're saying, I have more power than you. Do what I say. Don't question it. Well, by not questioning it, then you can't really analyze, well, what is the legitimacy? What is the justification for what you just asked me to do? In other words, you're trying to reveal the subjectivity, right? So I am all powerful. Therefore, I tell you to do this. You can't question it. Okay. But let's unpack that. So, why do you want me to do this? And so, in this process of asking why, you get to see how arbitrary it is, how it's just this person told you to do that because they're mad, because they're frustrated about something else. So, and if it's just something casual, there was nothing behind it, but this person wants to have something done, you reveal the foundation of that person's subjectivity. It challenges someone's assumptions, right? So what do they assume is true, from which now they're going to say the things that they say? If you get an angry reaction, it might be because they haven't thought why. Well, this is what we always do, right? And if that was their answer, this is what we always do, then well, why? Right. And you can see the frustration that comes from that. And so they're a little bit embarrassed that they haven't thought of it. They could be angry also because they realize, if they're quick, that they are just simply ordering you around with arbitrary subjectivity. And that if they answer that question, why, then there's no legitimacy in the request that they gave you. There could also be anger because one realizes that it is an unjust request. That if you keep asking why, it turns out that you are the person who is bad, who is the bad person, not the person who refuses to do what you ask them, so they're being disobedient, but it's you. You are the oppressor. So, in order to prevent people from coming to that realization, you censor, right? You ban speech in order to protect your authority and position. And so I've made episodes before how censorship is protection for bad ideas, right? Well, here in this specific situation, the bad ideas are coming from the person who is bad. And so not only are you protecting bad ideas, you're protecting bad people. Bad in the broad sense. Why are they bad? They're bad because they're wrong. They're bad because they're unjust. They're bad because they have bad ideas. I mean, there are different levels of bad, right? So by having censorship, by banning speech, you prevent conversation, right? So for me, a lot of, because I've been accused of being arrogant very frequently, quite simply because I just, I'll have a conversation, and because I know that people always think I think I'm so smart, which I don't. But all I do is I sit there and I just say, "Oh, so why do you think that? Oh, so what's the logic of that?" And so I'll just constantly ask why to try to understand other people, right? To me, that's my thing. I like getting to know other people. And so I ask why a lot. So how did you come to that conclusion? Or why do you think that? Why do you think this is good? To what end are you doing this? Oh, why? Why is that something worth going for? Right. And so by having this kind of conversation, you are revealing someone's subjectivity. Now, imagine doing that with the British government. So, why do we have to welcome illegal immigrants into the country? Why do we have to allow them to commit crimes in our society? Why do we have to give up our housing and our benefits and our futures for these illegal immigrants? What is why? And it quickly falls apart. If you are allowed to have that conversation, then everyone realizes that this is just really odd. This is really illogical. There's no rationality that has prosperity as part of the answer. That will not be in that conversation. And so finally, so it's a shame to see England in that situation, and to see just how the rule of law is just doesn't exist any longer. And I think I talked about rule of law last week. So Elon Musk buying X, Twitter when he bought it, X was doing a really great thing. I mean, at first I was a little bit, I don't know, but maybe he does believe that all of these dollars are IOU nothings, right? That it's just inflated paper. Maybe he realizes that. And so before all of it loses its value, he's like, okay, let's buy X, Twitter. So, and then he allowed it to be much more free in their speech. So I think that there are a lot of leftover lines of code from the previous employees. And so every once in a while, people get banned or whatever, or they get deplatformed or whatever. But I think it's nothing compared to what it was during the lockdowns and stuff, the way that people got censored and everything. So without Twitter, I'd still be suspicious of Trump's fall. Why did he fall in Butler, PA? What happened to him there? But because of it, I was able to get news faster than the mainstream media could even put out a narrative. In fact, I think that they had all these stories ready to come out when the assassination attempt was successful. And then all of a sudden it wasn't successful and they had to change everything, but they couldn't change everything fast enough. And that's why all the storyline titles were so weird. And then they were like, oh, okay, well, we got to change it, but we can't change it right away. I mean, who's going to change it? And, so they had everything in place, but then, they weren't flexible enough. They weren't smart enough to be able to change it in time, right? So Twitter X was blowing up every minute. There was more information. There was so much information sharing. I think that gave me a glimpse of what it's supposed to be, right? So you're no longer just having a free conversation with someone in your same house, your same community. You're having people in conversation with people who are actually there, with the police who are actually there. You don't have to wait for the media to tell you what you're supposed to know. There are a lot of people in the United States, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of people in the United States who don't know what to think unless they listen to the mass media, right? And unfortunately, there are too many people like that. However, all of the other people who are interested in being an individual, trying to figure out how to live their life in the best way possible, free speech is very, very important for this. Free speech means having access to more information, better information, information that is out of the box, out of the permitted box that you are allowed to live in. So, hats off to Elon Musk, also to the founding fathers of this country who made sure that freedom of speech was in the First Amendment, and for all of the teachers and people who continually tell other people just how important the freedom of speech is. So, yeah, myself included. So I hope that all of us remember this, and then we continue to maintain and fight for the freedom of speech. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.